that this welcome to the show, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I was going to tell the listeners, of course, that I have interviews with both the Tehran Times and also Russia's Sputnik International on this whole subject of the Ukraine and this whole subject of American-Russian relationships as far as NATO policy is concerned and what is happening, I think, in the United States in terms of the debate over what the United States position should be in all of this, and whether or not the United States has any business intervening in the Ukraine itself. So there are a lot of issues involved here, and I think in terms of some of the things I've already discussed, that my interview with the Tehran Times and also my more recent conversation with Sputnik International, I think will give the listeners a better grasp of what's happening here and why the United States is becoming more deeply involved in this situation in the Ukraine. And it's a very interesting circumstance because I really can't remember. I'm now 66 years old. It seems to me that the whole issue of American-Russian relations goes back to, I can't remember a worse circumstance that has surrounded the relationship between these countries since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis involving this whole situation with President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev. I think we're really about at that stage now in terms of a very serious situation. We'll just have to see what happens.
Okay, are you then perhaps suggesting that the United States and other Western countries have no business in interfering in this situation and possibly going ahead with sanctions against Russia?
I argue that the United States has absolutely no business in this situation. And if one looks at my conversations with the Tehran Times and Sputnik International, I think there are three important things to recognize in all of this. The first is that when the Berlin Wall came down, and subsequently with the end of the old Soviet Union, it is a fact that the United States, through President George Herbert Walker Bush and his Secretary of State, James Baker, assured Mr. Gorbachev that the United States would not take advantage of the end of the old Soviet Union by recruiting additional countries to belong to NATO, especially countries that were ex-Soviet republics, that the United States would not continue to move NATO and American military assets ever closer to Russian borders, and that the United States would continue to abide by arms control deals that had already been reached with the former Soviet Union. It's very significant, of course, that all of these things proved to be lies. The United States proceeded to recruit all kinds of additional countries, many of which were former Soviet republics, to join NATO. There is talk now that the United States would like to see both the Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO, among other countries. And this is the first problem. And Pat Buchanan and David Stockman, and certainly Paul Craig Roberts and Ron Paul, all of whom are on the Republican right, make the same points that I make in this regard, and that this whole issue of breaking our word to Mr. Gorbachev and to the Russian people, and subsequently the continued advancement of the NATO agenda and with NATO military assets ever closer to Russian borders in Eastern Europe, more and more American and NATO military exercises in the Baltic region, American and British and NATO involvement in the Black Sea with operations that are clearly aimed at Russia. And obviously now when we look at the Ukraine especially, we see that this all seems to be a part of a wider policy of the encircling of Russia. This has nothing to do with the national defense of the United States. It has absolutely nothing to do with the original purpose of NATO, which ceased to be once the Soviet Union, as we knew it during the Cold War, was out of business. So this is the first thing to recognize. It is the United States and the EU, secondarily, through the overthrow of the legitimately elected government of the Ukraine, the Yanukovych regime, created in February of 2014, beginning of this current crisis with this illegal coup d'etat that clearly was aimed at Putin's Russia and at the continued encirclement of Russia in their backyard and at the expense of their national security situation by what happened there, where the United States is now saying that democracy is at stake in the Ukraine. This is the position of Britain. This is the position of the other NATO members, when in fact it is the United States and the EU principally that violated every aspect of what we might loosely term democracy in any sense of the word by overthrowing the legitimate government of that country in February of 2014. And then Buchanan and David Stockman and Paul Craig Roberts and Ron Paul and I are all in agreement that there's no true United States national security interest that is involved in what we are doing in that country. This has everything to do with the profits of defense contractors. And when you have people like the current Secretary of Defense of the United States, very much involved with the Raytheon Corporation. This is, of course, I'm referring in this instance to Lloyd Austin. This is but one example of the way in which dirty money, as it were, permeates the views of many people in the American national security establishment who are taking this hawkish line toward Putin's Russia and on this whole issue of Ukraine. Another major figure involved in all of this, which is something that I discuss with both the Tehran Times and with Sputnik International, especially the latter, involves a Republican congressman from Ohio. He's a Republican. He's in the 10th Congressional District in the state of Ohio, which is where Dayton, Ohio is located, and where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the logistical hub of the United States Air Force, is located. That is one Congressman Michael Turner, who turns up as the ranking Republican member of the House Services Committee. He turns up now as the ranking Republican in the House Intelligence Committee. He is also, curiously enough, a past president from 2014 to 2016 of something called the NATO Parliamentary Committee, an organization I was not completely aware of until I did some research on it in more recent days. But again, when you look at Turner's record and resume, three of the top 5 industries that support this guy with campaign contributions, according to OpenSecrets.gov, I believe, or .com, are defense-related. Turner is a bigwig in the American intelligence community in regard to the interests of what we would call the Bush-McCain wing of the Republican Party. Now, this is important because when you look at a recent article in the New York Times on this subject, and you look at the writings of a senior national security correspondent for a publication called Defense One, I'm referring to a Jacqueline Felcher, because it's very clear that there is a major split in the Republican Party, as well as the Democratic Party, on this whole issue of American and NATO policy vis-a-vis Russia, especially as it involves the Ukraine. In the Republican Party, the libertarian and theoconservative wing of the Republican Party, Pat Buchanan, David Stockman, Ron Paul, Paul Craig Roberts, they all take the same position I do in regard to the total unacceptability and riskiness and downright recklessness of American and NATO policy as it relates to Russia over Ukraine. On the other hand, these people like Congressman Michael Turner of Dayton, Ohio, Ohio's 10th Congressional District, largely representing what I think we can call the the Bush-McCain wing of the Republican Party are really in bed with these defense contractors and all of these non-governmental organizations and neoconservative and Zionist think tanks that represent a radical, hawkish, pro-war perspective. There is a split of this type of the Democratic Party as well. The Biden, Clinton, Obama, Victoria Nuland wing of the Democratic Party is just as hawkish, if not more so, on this in the Bush-McCain wing of the Republican Party. And then you have, of course, in the Democratic Party, these anti-war activists who really mirror the concerns of their counterparts on the non-Bush-McCain wing of the Republican Party, going back to Mr. Buchanan, David Stockman, Ron Paul, Paul Craig Roberts. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in regard to what is clearly brewing now in this situation between the United States and Russia that I think David Stockman, among others, recognizes could easily ignite a third world war.
Absolutely.
This is. Yes.
Okay, you actually preempted all of my questions, and you've actually answered them regarding war is big business, and lots of people are going to be making lots of money out of this if it does end up being a full-scale war. And we've also been given to understand that Iran is the biggest winner in this scenario, but unfortunately we don't have time to talk some more. Very fascinating responses from you. Would love to chat to you for at least the next hour, but we will hook up again. Thank you indeed for your time, Mark Dankof, former US Senate candidate, talking to us about the possible Russian invasion into the Ukraine. 8:19 exactly.